Hello, everyone. My name is Diane O'Shea. I am pleased to be making this presentation for the Student Human Ecology Association about the history of home economics education in Ontario. I come as a former family studies home economics educator at the high school level and as well the Faculty of Education as a pre-service instructor in family studies. So let's begin. And ultimately, the story starts with milk, and milk that may have been contaminated. And I say that because, as with stories and theories and so on, there's always controversies. But I do believe that milk did have something to do with it. Adelaide Hunter Hoodless was devastated when she learned that the reason that her son died in 1889 was probably due to contaminated milk. And she was very distraught in that um, when she was told about this, that the doctor made the comment that women just didn't have an understanding about sanitation and hygiene and so on, or germs, and that there was really no education for women in these particular ways. Adelaide must have been a very forward-thinking woman. I think she was quite feisty, and she set out to do something about this. And as a result, she devoted her life to educating women and setting up institutions and so on that would help women in their roles as mothers and managers of the home and so on in having healthy families and healthy environments. As I say, Adelaide was a feisty woman, and she had tremendous networking skills as well, I believe. So, this one particular meeting where she was demonstrating her abilities happened in Guelph. It was a farmers' meeting, so it would be male. And she stood up and jolted, I think, the participants in claiming that they were neglecting their homes and families in favor of their animals. And she found that very um, upsetting. She was devoted in her thinking and in her belief that the management of the home had so much to do with uh, what was happening, and what was happening with homes and families had so much to do with the broader community. And she really advocated for home economics or domestic science in education reform. Now, we do need to understand that at the beginning of the 20th century, higher standards of sanitation and hygiene were being called for, and through education, and this was coming out of the Victorian era. The relationship with science and housing and sanitation and so on was seen as something that was really essential in schools. And this scientific approach was one that Ellen Swallow Richards was able to use, especially in thinking about the environment too, in the United States, and where she was able to bring home economics, domestic science into the school system. And the other thing we need to realize is that schools were the best way to reach a lot of people. And so it was hoped that by educating children, that there would be the rippling effect in homes, families, communities, province, nation, whatever. It was also a progressive movement time of educational reform, and we called it the progressive era, where schools were making shifts to manual training, to hands-on experiential training, we would call it now, as opposed to what had existed prior, that being more of rote learning and teacher directed initiatives. However, we also realize that things pertaining to food and clothing and housing and so on had to be combined with science. And so the idea of domestic science was one that emerged and targeted for women, because women, after all, were the managers of the homes and families. So, thanks to Adelaide's advocacy, courses in domestic science for girls and manual training for boys, these were added to the Ontario curriculum by the end of the 19th century. The Minister of Education at the time, the Honorable G.W. Ross, um, uh, uh, found Adelaide to be an excellent advocate, but also one that he could rely on to inform the public about domestic science and the need for it in the schools. And she became actually one of the first women on the province's payroll. And he also asked her to write what we consider to be the first textbook, Public School Domestic Science. And it was published in 1898. And copies are still available. I have one that is all based on microfilm, but it's really interesting to look at the kinds of things that were included in this domestic science textbooks, things related to cookery, to food preparation, to food preservation, but also things related to food science in terms of nutrition, how to look after sick people, invalids, how to clean and have and do laundry, all of those kinds of basic household things. It's hard to believe that it was thought that we needed training and education in those kinds of things, but indeed we did. And the schools were moving to incorporate that training, albeit targeted only at girls. Adelaide realized that if we were going to have domestic science in our schools, we needed to have qualified teachers. And she was able to secure a grant from the tobacco magnate Sir William MacDonald in Montreal, uh, monies to build an institute, what was referred to or called MacDonald Institute, at the university, or what would become the University of Guelph, but then the Ontario Agricultural College. And here she instituted what was called the normal course in domestic science, realizing, of course, that this idea of normal was what teachers' colleges were called before they were called teachers' education and faculties of education. This particular ad intrigued me a great deal, and it shows the agricultural college promoting the idea of tuition and board for a 3-month course in domestic science for girls. That course would focus on cooking, sewing, and laundry work. And I have a feeling my grandmother was one of those participants. We see that also the movement to this hands-on kind of training with the beginnings of food labs. And food labs, of course, still being very popular today. In 1912, the bulletin from the Ontario Department of Education described home economics as both a training course for home activities and also a way for girls to gain a good English education. So, yes, there was the zeroing in, if you will, on girls and training them for what was believed to be their only vocation, that being homemakers. But we also see that women were realizing that home economics, taking home ec, would be a way to get a university education. And so using this as a stepping stone to other opportunities, broader related opportunities in food, nutrition, textiles, and the like. And I think this demonstrates the dynamic shifts, which seem to be a recurring theme in home economics. As Elizabeth Berry, and she was trained at MacDonald Institute and spent her career in home economics in BC. She claims that gradually teachers realized they had to deal with food and clothing and shelter in broader ways. So, looking at the relationship with production and economics, so the resourcefulness and so on, and even from art, like the presentation, whether that had to do with food, whether it had to do with clothing, whether it had to do with interior effects within the home. And ultimately, all of these things connected to the family, to members within the family, and to society as a whole. Uh, this idea of economics and science and art were underlying themes in the uh, education during the 30s and 40s, um, underscoring, as I say, practical applications, be it in food or in clothing or in housing. It's really interesting. I have a notebook from my mother's grade nine home economics class. And when I look at the topics, yes, there were things to do with cookery, but then there's also things to do with nutrients. There's things to do with etiquette, something called charm, which I thought was kind of interesting. But then there's samples of making themes. And I do know that in her grade nine, and she would have been a student in the 30s, that she had to make a tailored blouse. So complete collar, cuff, um, buttonholes, the whole aspect there. So interesting, the kinds of topics that they were looking at, kind of balancing that idea with science and art in particular, and always with economics, because with the war years and the depression, those were very, very important aspects of society, and home ec had to make those shifts. Interestingly, home ec classes in the 30s and 40s, sorry, in the 30s, it would be the, well, I guess 40s too, that made vital contributions to the war effort in the kinds of things that they were making, bandages, socks, and all those kinds of things that were sent overseas, in addition to learning about how to handle food rationing. The 50s and 60s meant some interesting shifts with the post war boom, and we see for home economics movement towards consumer education. And I know for a fact that different colleagues that I've talked to moved upon graduation in home ec to work with appliance companies, teaching, if you will, the education in a different way, certainly in food with food companies and with commodity boards. Again, a different kind of education, but that training largely devoted toward the women because they were, in fact, the managers of the house of the home. We saw some other things though happening, and we see a kind of more of a social inclusion. So the courses in housing were reaching out to not just the interior design, that art application, but thinking more about the cost involved with renting and buying, or even building a home and renovations, that kind of thing. Girls were taught how to sew, but they were also being taught about production and where textiles were coming from, how they were made, uh, it, as I say, in addition to the making of clothes. Dr. Laura Tresnar was my predecessor at the Faculty of Education and spoke about the standards of home economics achieved by the how-to kind of instruction that dominated the field, and thinking about again about that hands-on learning, experiential aspects, the food labs. I mean, this food lab was not entirely different to the ones that I started my teaching in. And I know for a fact the benefits of students working together, collaborating, problem solving, following instructions and so on had great deal of benefits in many, many ways. One of the things that I do remember from the early 60s, though, is the fact that we were graded or evaluated according to our perfect muffins, perfect tea biscuits, or perfect seams. And quite frankly, I'm glad we've moved to different kinds of assessments and looking at the learning as opposed to the end product that results. Certainly, the 60s brought about immense social changes in our world and the society, and the whole idea of home economics and training women for a homemaker vocation was seriously questioned. Um, And we do know that there were a lot of changes happening as more women moved to work outside of the home. And so we had different issues arising with balancing work and family and childcare and so on. The Divorce Act had an impact. We saw rises in divorce rates, and so different kinds of families emerging and different needs, etc. Haven't got it down here, but the birth control pill made a tremendous impact as well. And so, indeed, the roles of women were changing, the roles of men were changing. It was a different shift, and home economics did embrace it, not without challenges, I should say. In 1972, we saw a name change as home economics became family studies. And I think it was in a response to that criticism that was being acknowledged about training women to be homemakers. And with that, we saw a move to both boys and girls being able to take home economics, or what, as I say, became known as family studies. And why not? Because our focuses have changed. We've realized that boys needed to look after themselves, whether it was feeding themselves or clothing themselves or um, personal cleanliness, financial management, all those kinds of things, as much as girls. But still, the relationships with family members within themselves, as well as the broader context, was very much at the curriculum level. This is the rollout, I guess you could say, of the 1987 curriculum. We see courses in families and family environments in the elementary education, focus on food, clothing, parenting, housing, and economics in the high school levels, high school grades, with opportunities to teach them on basic, general, or advanced levels. And then we also see this, what would become a sociology type of course with families in Canadian society for grade 13, or the OAC. However, this one, interestingly, did have a prerequisite in that yeah, I believe you had to have an English course. Even the ways of teaching methods got changed in that time period. So we saw more collaboration, more discussions, more um, uh, interactions happening. And of course, the experiential learning, the hands-on, was still a vital component. In the late 80s and 90s, the doors opened, and that was mainly because of that sociology type of course, that students had an opportunity to discuss very deep concerns that were happening in society at the time. So we saw work around dating violence and child abuse and neglect and power issues and remarriage and aging and all of those kinds of things starting to surface. Well, 1998 came, and the Conservative government, under the leadership of Mike Harris, brought in sweeping changes in what he called the common sense revolution. So, as a result, we saw the movement of a K to 12, so the elimination of grade 13 or the OAC course, and as a result, all the curriculum having to be rewritten and published, and it was done very, very quickly. The big thing that happened, and I remember there was a great deal of turmoil at the time. I remember my department head coming back from a meeting and saying, "Family studies is done, Diane. We're not going to be." And that was pretty devastating because where were we to head? What was to happen to all of this work that had been done, and the fact that families and individuals still needed some of these basic education opportunities. So we saw family studies come under the heading of social science. And but interestingly, family studies courses dominated social sciences. And so of the 19 courses, 13 were directly related to family studies. And we saw this movement in 1999 curriculum as a focus on the grade 9 and 10 courses, and then a movement to the grade 11 and 12 courses with more focus, I guess I would say. We also saw this movement towards college preparation and workplace preparation, what they called open courses. So depending on where you were headed to with post-secondary, certain courses might be more beneficial, more appealing, help in your future directions. So more of a relationship with the work aspect, I would say. We lost elementary education and elementary family studies education by about 2000, although you might have seen pockets of it in different school boards around Ontario. But essentially, it was lost, which is a real shame because we know for a fact that younger students could really benefit by with the concepts and the ideals of home ec education. So what we had to do was urge our teachers to integrate family studies concepts and topics and so on into their curriculum. So as school gardens, for example, it could be something that you would do with science or geography, but this could be lead into food preparation and making meals, learning more about making meals and snacks, and in fact, more about nutrition and relationship with a healthy body. In 2013, a new curriculum emerged. Again, family studies under social sciences and humanities. This time, although there are more courses in both family studies and social science, family studies dominates. And again, under some of the labels that we are best acquainted with. So under food and nutrition, for example, we see 7 different courses. And but the big thing, and this had happened in the previous um, curriculum shift too, is that the courses became optional or elective. And so for principals and school boards and so on, they would offer what was going to be most suitable for the students and meeting the needs of their particular clientele. So uh, food nutrition, for example, has 7 courses, which include, yes, things related to food and nutrition, but we also see food and culture with the emerging changes in our society and populations. So again, we see that shift of home ec responding to the needs of society. We see some of the basic elements still present, but in broader ways, and what was hoped to be more appealing in meeting with all the different needs at the time. Again, though, family studies courses, and these continue to be, are only elective, and it becomes a bit of a trick, especially if uh, having the reduction of grade 13 to get everything fit in that you need to have there. Oh, and then another thing that really got embedded because of the connection to social science is the fact of social science research and the skills associated with that. So more explanation in independent study, etc. Still, though, lots of opportunities for hands-on practical, and I will argue that those are the best ways for the students to learn and the kinds of things that are to this day the most popular, in addition to thinking about the societal issues and concerns of individuals and families. The Ontario Family Studies Home Economics Educators Association strive to promote family studies, and that seems to be something that I had spent my entire life doing, trying to help students and their parents see connections between our courses and future career possibilities. So the organization made these particular posters, and you can see, for example, where they were trying to show that courses in food and nutrition would be really beneficial if you wanted to work in food service or in dietetics in some way, or courses of human development would really help if you were going to be a social worker or involved in working with children with special needs, psychology, etc. So the history of home economics education certainly shows that it had its origin in the progressive era, progressive movement, which tied in with the fact it was really important to educate women, albeit in their roles as homemakers. Um, the idea of experiential or hands-on learning is certainly a huge part of the history of home economics from its very beginning and throughout its time. We see the alignments, maybe as a way to legitimize, but I think more just to expand our understanding of the relationships with science and art and technology and what could be done and what is being done or what needs to be thought about with food, with textiles, with housing, with human development. Um, but always at the root of the curriculum has been the idea of improving the quality of life of individuals and families. Yes, it's responded to and been shaped by changes in society, as I've mentioned, and it continues to address some of the deepest concerns that we have within our homes and families. And I guess the other big thing is that home economics, family studies, it's important for not only um, the individual, the growth of the individual, and understanding more about themselves and how they fit in, can work, and all that, but it also can lead to some very interesting careers, be it related to food and nutrition, to human development, etc. So very interdisciplinary for sure, but still very practical as we think about things related to financial management, as an example. Lots of opportunity for critical and creative thinking, as well as that hands on. And yes, the relationship between um, personal and professional lives. Faculties of education continue to provide Ontario schools with qualified family studies teachers. Western, that as in our particular area, is the only faculty that has hands-on courses. There are online offerings for credentials in some of the other universities. So Brescia has certainly played a huge role in home economics education, beginning as a training ground for women in their vocation, or what's deemed to be their vocation as women, but certainly shifting and changing. And I have every confidence as Brescia goes through yet another change that the needs of individuals and families will be responded to, but perhaps in just different ways.